Self-care is daily, all day long. It is not after work. It is not on the weekend. It is not when I get to take a vacation. Or it is not when I get to go get my hair cut or when I get my nails done or, some very, go to the spa or those kinds of things. Those are nice things to do, obviously, for yourself for self-care. But if you think of self-care in those very compartmentalized moments of time, you will miss it. And also you will find yourself burning out, flaming out, and need a break.
You're listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. In this series, we'll explore a variety of well-being topics with experts from the university community in physical, emotional, nutritional, and financial health. Join us, and together we'll discover how we can thrive at work, home, and beyond. Welcome back to Becoming Wildly Resilient. For those of you joining for the first time, I'm your host, Jakob Hester, and I'm a wellness specialist with UK HR Health and Wellness. Today, I'm joined by not one, but two guests. We'll be chatting about how we can balance taking care of ourselves while we're taking care of others. And who better to join me than two of our experts from UK HR Work Life. I think this episode will contain some good information regardless of whether you are actively caring for someone or not. So my first guest is Azetta Beatty. She is the work-life manager for HR, and she's also a certified family life educator. Thanks for joining me, Azetta. To get us started, I like to give guests the opportunity to tell a little bit about themselves and what they do for the university.
Right. So I am pleased to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. I work as the HR manager, of course, in the Office of Work Life, and primarily my role is to assist our employees as they are managing their work and life responsibilities. And that looks different for different people because people are in different stages of their lives. So there may be some people that have childcare needs, and so we have resources to support those childcare needs. We may have someone that's a new parent, and we have resources for new parents. We also have resources for eldercare. We have resources for mental health assistance. We also have resources for flexible work arrangements. So my role primarily is to oversee all of these resources and services, collaborating with different departments on campus, working with our parents, working with our managers, our supervisors, to make sure that we are providing adequate support and encouragement to our employees as we know they are managing work and life responsibilities.
Work Life and Azetta and that whole group over there are one of our well-being partners in HR, so I'm glad to have Azetta on here. As I mentioned at the beginning, the two conversations in this episode are going to focus on balancing the demands of work and life, specifically how we can take care of ourselves so that we can best show up for those that depend on us. So one of the obvious examples of that is parenting. So unlike my last conversation, this subject is something I have zero experience in. So I'm really coming from a place of curiosity with this. So what are some of the unique challenges that parents in the workforce face?
Well, for one, time management is a little different when you are a parent versus when you're not. I can distinctly remember when I wasn't a parent, when it didn't mean much to me if I worked late. If I worked till 7 o'clock, that was fine. But I also distinctly remember when I became a parent with my first child and I had to have her picked up from daycare by 6 o'clock. So that meant I had to leave work at least by 5:30, and that was really pushing it. So, there's some time management things that you deal with as a parent that you don't deal with if you're not. So, for example, even simple things as morning routine. Your morning routine probably looks a lot different than someone that doesn't have children. You may have children that you have to get up and get out to school. You may be taking them to school. You may be taking them to the bus stop. You may just be getting them ready. Those kinds of things. So your morning routine may look different. I think even your mindset, like the things that you tend to be focused on, you have extra things you're thinking about throughout the day. Something as simple as, do you need to schedule a dentist appointment for someone? Does someone need a new pair of shoes? Just everyday things going on in your mind while you are also trying to work and focus. So I think that's sort of a unique challenge that parents have, that they are always thinking about things related to parenting and parenting responsibilities while also trying to be an effective worker.
Yeah, I think time management is a good piece, especially when we're talking about thriving at work and beyond. I mean, that's something that I wouldn't have thought about, and you may take for granted a lot of times too, especially when somebody else is depending on you like that. And you mentioned having to leave by a specific time. If I'm in the middle of something and I feel like I just want to work an extra 15 minutes, I have that luxury. But if somebody else is depending on me for a ride or something like that, I need to get out the door in time. Otherwise, I'm setting them back too. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, and how it really changes your whole experience when it comes to work and life and everything as well. So with K through 12 schools starting back, many of which are starting back remotely, has the current COVID-19 pandemic really amplified this for parents, or has it created a whole new set of challenges? What are you hearing?
I would say it's definitely a new set of challenges, simply because parents, we do have a lot of parents that are working remotely, and we do have some that are going on site that are working at the university. So, depending on which role you find yourself in, you have a different set of challenges potentially. The other thing that impacts the parents with the virtual learning is depending on your children's ages. So if you have teenagers, you may not be quite as concerned. You may definitely have to check and make sure that they know how to log in and that they're doing their assignments. You may check in with them a little bit, but maybe not quite as much. But if you have an elementary school child in particular, or dare say you have more than one elementary school child, that is a whole nother challenge. Even if you have children that are pretty independent and they can do things themselves, if they are working at home and trying to get their assignments done, you may very well have to stop a few times in the middle of maybe doing something that you consider really important or really trying to focus on a project and assist them. So there's a lot of potential for parents to have quite a bit of extra stress. And so one of the common things we talk about when we talk about parenting is the mental load that you carry as a parent. And I think all of us, whether we are parents or not, carry mental load. And mental load is simply thinking about things that you have to do. So like all of us may be thinking about, what do I have to pick up after work for groceries, to make whatever a particular meal, or am I taking a trip in a week? Have I gassed up the vehicle? Have I had a service? You may be, even if you don't have children, we all have mental load. But then when you add children to that, there's a whole nother set. And then the other challenge that some parents are facing is they're concerned about whether their child is getting adequate education. There's that piece of they're learning remotely, but you're really hoping that they are getting the education that they need in this remote setting. Because if they weren't already in a remote setting, that's a whole shift in how you learn and how you engage on a regular basis.
It kind of sounds like the COVID-19 pandemic has really sort of flipped this upside down, and that whole new set of challenges is very different and something that we're not used to. Because you mentioned at the beginning more about like the time management piece of like the morning routine. That piece has probably gotten, I would assume, a little bit easier, but you have the entire day now that you have to think about all of these other things, particularly when they're in remote learning at the moment, and worrying about getting that adequate education. And it seems like such an opportunity to go into sort of a new world, but you also have, you're talking about that mental load, that kind of thought in the back of your mind, like, is this enough? Are we doing this right? So there are sort of some opportunities along with those challenges. So as a mother, you mentioned a little bit of your experience earlier. I imagine you've had to cope with this personally and try to adjust to it. So can you tell us just a little about your experience during this time?
Absolutely. I can say overall it's been pretty good. One thing I've noticed recently is that I'm not stopping when I should stop at the end of the day. And so, I'm thinking like, goodness, I work and work life. I know how important this is to balance this time. But depending on what's going on and what I have going on, I have found myself here recently just working several hours after I should have stopped. And the big kind of eye opener for me is when one of my children walk through the room and go, "Are you still working?" That's a big eye opener. That's a big check. Like, okay, you need to do something. This is not, you don't need to do this. And so other things that I've noticed just kind of in our household, I have definitely appreciated my 1 minute commute to work. And I kind of joke about that because I mean, I get up and I get ready and I start. I mean, I walk down the hall basically. And I think I've appreciated that. I have appreciated because I used to get up really early because I had a child that used to catch the bus at 6:30. So that was my everyday, getting up really early. So you can imagine with that type of schedule, by 9:30, I was really tired. I was like, I'm done for the day. But one thing I've appreciated about this is, the family time. So I'm hoping that other parents that have had this time, although there's is absolutely been some challenges, especially depending on how many children you have and the ages of your children, or even the needs of your children. Some parents have special needs children and they need more and they from them throughout the day. And so that requires them maybe to stop more than they would hope to stop, in their working day. But hopefully, all parents have also enjoyed just having more family time. When I think about that, some of the things I've done, my son and I usually go for 1 or 2 walks a day. We may take a morning walk, afternoon walk. If we're really ambitious, we may take an evening walk. And these are short walks, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and we just talk about whatever. And sometimes we'll bring along some little cards and answer questions. And, maybe he's riding his bike and I'm just walking. Maybe we'll take the dog with us. I mean, there's been lots of little things like that just to appreciate. And for other people that I've talked to that are working remotely, parents and non-parents, they've also mentioned just being able to have time with their pets. If you have cats and dogs or pets at home, the pets are like, "Hey, what are you doing here all day?" And so that's been part of their stress relief in some ways, helping them to kind of balance things. But to kind of go back to your question, thinking about things that I really appreciated about this time in my experience, I do recall when we first started this that it was a lot of figuring out the schedule, the schedule for my children and the work that they needed to do. But they were really good about getting on their Chromebooks or getting on the computer and getting started with the work that they needed to do. And so that wasn't that much of a stretch, but I did notice once school ended in May, there was a little less stress in terms of they have to get these assignments done. Are you doing these assignments? And everyone could kind of breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, like, goodness, we made it through that. So I can anticipate that some parents are really concerned going into this new school year. And I've actually heard from some parents that they are really concerned about going into this new school year, starting it virtually, simply because they remember a little bit of the experience from March and April and May. And of course, they are hoping that things are a little bit better. So they're hopeful, but at the same time, they are busy with their own work. And so the idea of now having children there at the home with them, if they're working remotely, they are really concerned about that. And then, of course, we have parents that are going on to the campus to work. It could be 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and they are trying to figure out childcare because think about it, if the children were in school physically, they would be physically in school and they may have an after school care or even a preschool care, before school care that they utilize to help kind of manage things. But now that they're virtually learning, they are a little concerned about how that's going to look. So one thing I can really appreciate is one parent telling me the story about how she got to see her daughter walk. And she was saying, usually I get these updates of her doing things from the daycare, but because daycare was closed and everyone was home, they got to see her walk for the first time. And they got to see her do lots of other things because she was less than one. And so, hearing from other parents and even my own experiences, it's been great to just have more family time and even just to have more time to get to know and to see and to interact with your family members. And so, working parents are oftentimes always looking for opportunities for that moment to do something extra because you always have a list of things to do.
Yeah, that's that time management, I think, is showing there again. And I think that could be a strength of working parents too, if you're thinking about parents in the workplace and that ability to manage time when you have so many things and so many other people counting on you and that sort of thing. Could be a really important thing. But I want to touch on a couple of points here that you mentioned, particularly sort of at the start there. You mentioned not stopping when you should, when you're talking about your personal experience. And I've mentioned this in the last couple of episodes that we, as the experts, we work in sort of this general well-being realm, and we work in human resources, and we are ourselves not immune to this. We are just as human as everyone else. So we go through a lot of the same struggles that the employees that we serve go through. So it's really helpful for people to see that too. I think another thing that you touched on really well in there, we're taking out some of the positives of a challenge like COVID-19 pandemic. What are some of the bright sides that we can look on to try to make the best of the situation that we're in? Because we can't make a massive change on this immediately. So we have to sort of look at it in a positive light sometimes. And I think that's a common thread that's been in the last 2 episodes as well, is this idea of mindset, particularly that sort of idea of growth mindset, which is looking for those opportunities among the challenges. So I think you really hit on that really well with some personal examples and some examples that you've heard from others. So thinking about self-care now, particularly when you are caring for others, how often do you hear parents say something to the effect of, I don't have the time or I don't have the energy to focus on myself?
I think that's a common theme with parents. And that's one thing I really do appreciate about this role that I'm in, working with parents and providing resources to parents, and working with our therapists to, provide resources and services to parents and encouragement. Because sometimes we all need reminders, and parents need reminders to take care of yourself. And one of the messages we like to always send is, when it comes to self-care, is that self-care is daily, all day long. It is not after work. It is not on the weekend. It is not when I get to take a vacation. Or it is not when I get to go get my hair cut, or when I get my nails done, or, some very, go to the spa, or those kinds of things. Those are nice things to do, obviously, for yourself, for self-care. But if you think of self-care in those very compartmentalized moments of time, you will miss it. And also you will find yourself burning out, flaming out, and need a break. So we always encourage people to think of self-care as daily, all day long. So what does that mean? That may mean taking stretch breaks. That may mean eating in the morning when you get up. Or if you are a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, getting up and taking 5 or 10 minutes and just sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee or tea. Like, literally give yourself permission to take that 10 or 15 minutes. Also, it may mean, if we all need humor in our lives. So maybe one way you kind of give yourself a mental break is watch funny videos. Call a friend and take a 15-minute break and just say, hi, friend, just checking on you, and talk to them a little bit. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. One of the things I do personally is I make sure, I mentioned that I take those walks with my son. And sometimes it is literally like a 10-minute walk, because I just have a moment between a meeting and I'm thinking, I just need some fresh air. We're going to walk down to the end of the street and back. And it may be 10 minutes later and I'm on a call. But I've been trying to be very intentional, keeping in mind that self-care is every day, all day long. And different people have different interests. Some people may like to read, so that's fine. Take a moment and take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and read a few chapters or a chapter of a book. If you feel like, I'm not really that reader, but I don't mind audiobooks, we love audiobooks in my house. So, listen to the audiobook, go for a walk and listen to the audiobook. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do. And again, people have different interests. So think about your own personal interests. Do you like to run? Do you like to walk? Do you like to color? Do you like puzzles? I started doing crossword puzzles at one point because I was thinking, I need a mental break. What can I do? Oh, this is easy. Word search. Get a word search out and spend like 10 minutes looking for some words, just something different. So self-care is so very important. So I highly recommend people think of that as a everyday, all day. What little things can I do throughout the day? I recently started using my Fitbit, and so now my Fitbit just is vibrating every so often, and I try to not ignore it. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And so that's my reminder to get up and move and stretch or do something. So even something like a Fitbit can help you.
I think the idea of self-care being a daily, all-day activity is really, really important for people. So you mentioned the idea of it being like, I'm going to go get my hair done, or I'm going to go get a massage or something like that, where it's like this sort of moment. Maybe it's a 30 minutes, maybe it's an hour, and you kind of compartmentalize self-care into that specific time. And you think that that's going to solve all the other time. And oftentimes it doesn't. It is an ongoing process that we have to go through. And you gave a lot of good examples there of things that people can do, can explore, and really just take a few moments to be able to do that. So whether that is a crossword, I've become pretty partial to crosswords myself lately. So it's funny you mentioned that, and coloring as well. That's always been a good kind of mental break for me. I mean, that's usually where a lot of my creativity happens too. When I sort of shut down and just focus on coloring, I'll have a lot of good ideas. Or if I've been stuck on a project or something like that, I can get some ideas generated that way. Again, you mentioned it doesn't have to be a long time, and really tailor it to what it is that you enjoy, what your interests are. So I think that was a really good thing to touch on. And something else you mentioned too that sort of ties into the previous conversation in that last episode about using your Fitbit as a stimulus to remind you to get up to move. So that was what Carrie had talked about in that previous episode, was having some kind of sensory trigger to remind yourself to move. But I think you can do that same concept with self-care. Maybe you set a specific time of the day that you set aside to focus on yourself for a few minutes. Or if you are somebody that gets locked into it and you need that break, you could set an alarm on your Fitbit or use that movement time as a break as well, and use that as self-care time. So I think you provided a lot of really good examples there as well. So for those that may be supervisors of or coworkers with working parents, what can we do during this time to help support them, especially knowing that something like the COVID-19 pandemic is really throwing them for an extra loop as well with some of the other responsibilities that they have?
That's an excellent question. For one thing, ask. Simply ask, how are you doing? Ask that question, and ask that question often. How are you doing? And then ask specific questions. How are your children? Call them by name if you know. How's your spouse or partner? If you know things are going on with that person, or they had a family member, something's happening, or they, adding a deck to their home, or whatever the case may be, ask them about, very specifically, how are you doing? How is that particular thing going? Kind of keep track of it. As a supervisor, it's really great to keep in mind when people share things with you and they say, oh, I have this going on or that going on, or this person got married and I didn't go and I was so bummed about that, or whatever. And you can just ask about that every so often just to see how they're doing. Ask how you can help. And also keep in mind that the parent that is also working, especially now that school is about to start back, that parent is their schedule's probably going to change week to week. And in fact, it may even change several times in one week. And so just being flexible with them and really building that trust and that communication and letting them know that you are there to support them and that you want to work with them, and let them, just say outright, how can I help you? Let me know how I can support you. Let me know what you need. And that's with the peers as well. And then also, if they're not meeting an expectation, just be honest about that, in a private conversation, obviously, privately say, here's the things I need for you to do. And it may be that this is a great time to be flexible with some projects. Really think about, are these particular projects they're currently working on a priority? And if they can be spread out. So maybe keeping in mind that this person may not be able to do their normal volume of work in the time frame that they normally would do it from the office, if they're working remotely, or even if they're working from the office. Just keeping in mind that the volume may need to be adjusted or the projects may need to be reprioritized, and letting them know it's okay to reprioritize some of these projects. It's okay to take 2 weeks to get this done versus 1 week, like you normally might take 2 days, or get this to me by the end of the week, or something like that. So, really just communicating and using your words and your actions to communicate with the employee, and also try to have some face to face as often as possible so that you can see the nonverbals. A person can text you and say one thing, but if you're looking at them via Zoom, you can see their facial expression. You can see by whatever they just shared with you, just how much that is stressing them out, just how much they are really frustrated about that situation. So really try to have as many face-to-face as possible and really read into some of those nonverbals and ask about them. And so I think that's some of the big picture things.
Yeah, I think you touched on some good points there. And we hear this from the governor, we hear this from the president of the university about getting through this together. And so that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I'm in the seat of, I'm not a working parent. I hope to be at some point, but I'm currently not. But how can I be better towards my coworkers? How can I help them during this time? And really, for me to be able to experience that empathy and then to express that compassion to them to really drive us towards getting through this together. And so I think you talked about that connection piece and that community and things like communication and flexibility being really important during this time. So I think those are some good things for those listening that are not currently working parents or have previously been working parents, and have that experience as well. They can shed some light on a lot of this, and just really being kind of flexible and open, I think, is really important for everyone at this time. So where can listeners dive a little deeper on this or similar topics? What podcasts, websites, books, things that you think would really add value to listeners' lives?
There's this one book that we hosted a book club on earlier this year actually, and it was called Stretch Too Thin. And that book was, I think, amazing for the parents that were able to participate and listen to it. But Stretch Too Thin is a book that not only talks about parenting, but it talks about life and how we all can be stretched too thin. And there are ways that you can approach that. And sometimes the stretch too thin is things that we're taking on ourselves and we need to reprioritize, or maybe do you need to do that? For example, it talks about the need to do versus want to do. And so there's lots of, I think, things that parents can glean from that. But that book offers some practical advice that's really applicable, and even just reset your mind and reset how you do things, and make sure that you are most effective, and that it's okay to say no to things. It's okay not to participate in certain things. We sometimes we take on things that stretch us thinner than we need to. So if there's any hope, I think that book is encouraging.
We'll be sure to link that in the show notes. So what are some resources that WorkLife offers to support UK employees as parents?
So we have some wonderful resources listed on our website. There's a section called Resources for Parents. In that section, parents can find information about, like, for example, lactation support. They can find information about child care centers and how to select a good child care center, and the signs and the questions to ask, things like that. We have information about summer camps and day camps, and facilities that offer UK discounts. We just have a lot of good childcare related resources on our website. We also have a Working Parents Network that is an active group of parents that work at the university, and we are basically like a parent support group, if one way to think about it. And this group meets monthly. We have monthly topics, so we meet every second Tuesday of the month at noon, and we have a different topic that we cover, and we have usually a guest speaker coming to talk about different topics, and that's via Zoom. And then we also have a parents coffee talk at 8:30 on the third Wednesday of the month, and that's just for those parents that are those early birds and they'd love to have a conversation. And so that's a very informal kind of a talk. There's no speaker per se, but we do tend to have topics. And this group is a great group to connect with if you just need someone to talk to that you feel understands what you're going through. One of the things that we really realize when it comes to parenting is that it's nothing like asking another parent a question about parenting. You can read resources, you can read books. I mean, you can, all that's helpful, but there's nothing like having another parent to go to and say, okay, so we're trying to potty train. I need some suggestions. Or I'm trying this method and it doesn't seem to be working. What do you think I'm doing? What's happening here? What do you suggest? There's nothing like asking another parent. So this is a great opportunity to connect. We also have a Facebook group. It's called UK Working Parents. So if a parent wanted to join that group, I highly recommend it because that is a very active group where we are constantly sharing tips and suggestions and people asking questions. We share articles about parenting related things. We share about upcoming activities or camps that we hear about, all kinds of things like that. So we highly recommend UK parents to join our UK Working Parents Facebook group. And I think they'll find that very supportive. And then, of course, all of the other work life resources and the therapists, and I think parents will find beneficial as well.
Yeah, plenty of opportunities there to get through things together. Again, kind of tying that back in. So I know you have Work and Family Month coming up through the month of October. So can you give listeners just a brief preview of that as well?
So National Work and Family Month in October is basically an opportunity to focus on families and parents and their needs and even their unique challenges. And so we will have a few additional workshops. For example, one of the additional workshops is Children and Mental Health, Know When to Get Help. That is one of the workshops we're offering on October the 22nd. In addition to that, we will be offering some of our ongoing programs, such as our Real Talk. It's going to be October the 6th, and the topic there is stress. And so, of course, no one knows stress like parents. And then you think about some of the other topics. We have some Work Life Rocks series topics that are coming up as well that will be helpful to parents, I think, in that particular month.
Great. We'll link to a lot of these things in the show notes. So to wrap up, if there's one thing you hope listeners take away from this conversation, what's that kind of one short piece of advice you would give?
One piece of advice I would offer is know yourself. Pay attention to your own internal warning signals. Know if you need a break, take a break. Know if you need help, ask for help, and it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to let your supervisor, your peers know what you need and what challenges you are facing as a working parent. Also, it's important to connect with support resources such as the Working Parent Network, where if nothing else, you can just have a conversation with another parent that understands what you're going through and that can offer you, if nothing else, just, I understand, I get it. So I highly recommend all parents just take advantage of the different resources and services and mark time on your calendar for self-care. Mark time on your calendar to attend some of these upcoming workshops and events and activities that we have that are here to support all employees, but specifically the parents. I find that sometimes people simply don't put things on their calendar. They see a workshop, they see an upcoming activity or presentation, and they think, gosh, that's a great topic. I think I want to attend that. And they don't put it on their calendar and they forget about it. So I highly, as far as one of the last points of encouragement, know yourself, pay attention to your internal signals, know what's going on with you, seek help if you need it, and, make time for things that are going to enrich you and support you and encourage you and build you up, and just know that you can do it.
Yeah, so we appreciate you chatting with us. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Joining me now is Terri Weber. Terri's a certified social worker and elder care specialist with UK HR Work Life. Glad to have you on the show, Terri. Before we get into our conversation on taking care of our older loved ones, can you tell us a little more about yourself?
Hi, Jacob. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate this. As Jacob said, I'm a social worker with the Department of Work Life Elder Care Office, and I've been an elder care specialist here at UK for 10 years. During this time, I've also been part of the sandwich generation, a wife, a mother, and a daughter. I was caring for my father who lived with us. We were a multi-generational household, so I understand the challenges of being a working caregiver. So many people nowadays are working remotely, but I actually started working remotely 4 years ago when my family moved to Wisconsin. So now I live with my husband, our new puppy, and my 12-year-old cat, who's not so happy about the puppy.
Yeah, you've got a lot of good experience there that you can share with people as well, which I think is really great. So in the first part of our episode here, I spoke with Azetta Beatty about balancing work and being a parent, particularly during a time like the current pandemic that we're in. So moving into talking about caring for older loved ones, I'm curious, are there any commonalities that you see between parenting and elder care?
Good question. Parenting and elder care do have some things in common. The goal as both a parent and a caregiver is to maintain the health and safety of those we love. But I think that the aim of these two roles are quite different. Parents' goal is to guide their children into adulthood, whereas the goal of someone caring for an older loved one is to help them during the end part of their life's journey. So we have to kind of think of it as a spectrum, parenting on one end, elder care on the other, but it's two sides of the same coin.
That's great. That was something I think we sort of take for granted too. It's sort of sometimes that comparison that you get between children and taking care of pets as well. I think it sometimes can cheapen one or the other when they do have some similarities, but they're not always the same. And there's definitely are some differences between those. And it's good to highlight those and understand those differences as well. So we know that stress is universal then. At some point, we're all going to face it in some way, but the source of that stress and the level of that stress can really vary. So in the context of elder care, what is caregiver stress and what are the signs of it?
Well, as you said, stress is universal, so everyone feels it. And stress is that fight or that flight response we've all heard about. It's the body's reaction to an adverse situation, whether that situation is real or not. It's characterized by physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. And for caregivers, it's often brought on by neglecting our own physical and emotional health. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in our caregiving responsibilities, we don't even realize what's happening. But if stress is left unmanaged, as you know, it can lead to serious physical and mental health problems. Stress means different things to different people. And what causes stress in one person may be of little concern to another, and everyone reacts differently. So for some caregivers, it's that constant demand of caring for another person. But for someone else, it's maybe that lack of boundaries between being a caregiver and being a spouse, or being a caregiver and being their adult child. And then for others, it's sometimes the unrealistic expectations caregivers place on themselves. You know, we all want to be everything to everyone, and that's just not possible. So going back to your question, what are the signs of caregiving stress? They're not unique per se to caregivers, but it's that feeling of constant worry, waking up in the morning feeling anxious already about what the day has in store for them. It's feelings of being overwhelmed, not being able to cope. It's the inability to focus and to concentrate on a task. It's forgetfulness and disorganization. It's becoming easily irritated or frustrated or having a short temper. And some of the physical signs, it's eating more or less, or changes in your sleep habits. Stress shows up differently in everybody. And stress by itself isn't bad. But what's important is how we deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's kind of what I want to spend the bulk of our remaining time here talking about. Knowing that our listeners are really in different stages potentially of life and of caregiving, let's sort of break this down two ways. The first of which, let's talk about addressing caregiver stress while actively providing care for an elder loved one. And then the second one, we'll kind of touch on preparing for its possibility for those like myself who have not quite reached that stage yet either. So let's start with the caregiver stress while actively caring for someone. What's important for people in this situation to know?
Well, anyone who's a caregiver already knows how stressful it can be, period. I mean, Caregiving is stressful, but managing this stress is important for caregivers' well-being, because who's going to take care of your older loved one if you aren't able? Caregivers spend a lot of time thinking of and doing for other people, and that leaves little time for themselves. So I would say self-care is the key. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's critical in being a good caregiver. But sometimes when you are in the middle of it, finding and taking the time for yourself seems selfish and indulgent. But it's not. We got to keep telling ourselves self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity.
That's something that Azetta and I talked about as well, is the idea of the importance of self-care and taking care of yourself so that you can show up as your best for others. I mean, to not think of that as a selfish thing. And something that Azetta talked about that I'll kind of recap is it's an ongoing process. It's an everyday, all day process rather than these little moments in time where you may get a massage or something like that. And so I think you kind of touched on that point a little bit. I mean, I think what you said with, if not you, who? So I think you have to keep that in the back of your mind based on what you're saying, that is important, because if you can't take care of yourself and you can't show up for others, then who's going to take care of them? So it is not selfish. Mm-mm. It's the way that you can move forward and you can give your best as well.
That's right. Taking time for yourself, no matter how long or short that period is, just makes you more equipped for challenges of caregiving. It makes you more confident in your abilities and much better able to adapt and recover from setbacks. And believe me, there will be setbacks. But here are some things that I've learned over the years, kind of some strategies. One way to manage stress is to be active. Get some exercise is a great way to manage your overall well-being. It helps release those endorphins in the brain, which energizes you and makes you feel good. A 10-minute walk can give you time to think, to vent to yourself, or to simply have nothing else to do but walk. You don't have to talk with anyone, you don't have to listen to anyone, and you don't have to help anyone. And another way I found to manage stress is to eat healthy. Although this is where mindfulness comes in. You need to be very mindful about what you eat, and so it's easy to forget about your own needs when you're caring for a loved one. But avoiding all that processed food and excess alcohol and trying to eat a healthy diet keeps your energy up and kind of gives you a better outlook on life. And sleep. We can't forget sleep. Poor sleep can affect your memory, your judgment, and your mood. And if you're continually being sleep deprived, it can have all sorts of negative consequences. And I know it's hard, but maintaining a healthy bedtime routine can really help in getting a better night's sleep. Like we talked about, taking time out is another way to manage stress. And I know it's easier said than done being a caregiver. It can be incredibly hard to find time for yourself when you're caring for someone else. And even when you do, you're thinking about what you should be doing or could be doing. But spending time with yourself away from everybody else is time well spent. Remember, you are more than a caregiver. You're a friend, you're a parent, you're a coworker, and you hold all these different titles. Another point, I think, is give yourself some grace. We all make mistakes, and things aren't always going to go the way we want. Caregiving is hard, and when we're going through a particularly tough time, allow yourself some kindness. We're human. We can't do it all. Sometimes we wish our situation was different. But in the end, caregiving really for an older loved one is truly a noble thing. And finally, I really think staying connected with family and friends is super important. Surrounding yourselves with people that you trust and respect and with whom you can share your frustrations and sadness with helps you feel connected. Again, it's not selfish, it's essential. Eldercare has kind of come up with what we call the 6 tenets of caregiving. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's posted on our website.
We'll actually link to that in the show notes as well. I think you covered a few good points and things that I want to, again, highlight. Finding the things that work for you. This was something that Azetta and I talked about as well. And what are those things that help you recharge? So it may be different for different people. So trying different things and looking for the things that are going to work for you are really important. I think you also show the importance of focusing on your entire well-being, not just these individual segments of your well-being, like how nutrition plays into this and how sleep plays into this. These things are all interconnected. So if we can positively affect one, it may kind of chain reaction to the other. And so I think that gives us a really good holistic look at well-being. And again, sort of the idea of this podcast and having different topics each episode. And I think that was a good thread that you tied through all of those. And then there was a couple of points that you made that I thought were really great as well, that tie really well into the conversation with Azetta, which were being flexible is what it sounded like, applying some kindness, so some of that compassion as well, whether that be to yourself or whether that be to others who may be going through it. And then that connection piece. We talked about that as well, about how important that is to ask for help if you need it, but to sometimes just be there with people or to listen to people. Kind of having grandparents who have now all passed away, that's something I wish I still had, is that opportunity to be able to sit down with them and to continue to connect with them as well. So I think this goes beyond just the support of it and thinking about caregiving and how you want those final days to be, I think would be really important. So to not miss that connection with them and not think of it as just a job. Again, I'm kind of looking at this as an outsider, but I'm thinking about my potential future with this as well and how I want to approach it. And so that's something I just kind of wanted to bring up. So kind of speaking again as somebody who's not currently in this position, for those who are listening that are not currently taking care of an older loved one, what advice or tips would you give to them to prepare for caregiving and to help minimize some of the stress that often comes along with this?
Well, starting on all those things we just talked about maybe is a good start. But for people who are going to be potential caregivers, caregiving down the road, now is the time to get the practical things in place. And that's for both you and your loved one. So you need to talk about the future. Don't assume that you know what type of care your loved one wants, because you don't. Ask. Family conversations, no matter how difficult, are an important part of care planning. You and your loved one need to discuss these options. What would they like most and what is most realistic for everyone? And kind of going into the next point is, what can you afford? No one likes talking about money, especially a parent with their adult child. There are very real costs to caregiving, such as can your loved one afford to stay in their home and hire in-home care when they're no longer able to be independent? Or can they afford to move into an assisted or personal care facility? Remember, Medicare doesn't pay for these things. You need to find out what their finances are, where their finances are, and who has access to this money. And that kind of brings us into the last point, is to make sure that the legal protections are in place for both you and your loved one. Crises will happen. It is inevitable. You need to look over your loved one's legal documents. Do they have a living will? Do they have a durable power of attorney? Do they have a healthcare surrogate? And do they have a will? So when someone becomes unable to speak for themselves, these documents will ensure that their wishes for their finances, their health, their long-term care, and their end-of-life care will be known.
That's really important, talking about not assuming things and to have that conversation now. Again, thinking personally about this, how those legal protections and getting into things like living wills and powers of attorney and those types of documents that you have to have, that's a lot to unpack. So I think that really ties great into another question, which particularly for those who are working at UK, what resources do you offer through Work Life for those that are either actively going through caregiving or are preparing for it in the future?
Well, the Work Life Eldercare Office can provide support, guidance, and assistance in finding services to help you, no matter where you are in your caregiving journey, if you're just starting out or you're at the end. We offer monthly lunch and learns featuring experts from around the community talking on a variety of eldercare topics. We also have a monthly support group, which I co-host with Ann Bissoni. She's one of the Work-Life Connection therapists. And in November, we always host our annual Senior Caregiving Conference. Now this year, because of the pandemic, it's going to look a little bit different. But we'll be having a 2-hour webinar with Teepa Snow. She is well recognized and respected as a dementia care expert. And we're also going to be having, this is going to be neat, a virtual senior resource fair. And this is going to be an opportunity for UK caregivers and community caregivers to talk via Zoom with different senior care agencies in the community about what services they can help and provide, or what they can provide and how they can help you and your loved one.
That's great. We'll link a lot of these things as well in the show notes. Azetta also briefly previewed Work and Family Month already. Are there any things you'll be offering during October that people should be on the lookout for?
Well, we're going to be hosting a lunch and learn, one of our monthly lunch and learns. And in October, we're going to be talking with Esther Hurlbert. She is one of the local geriatric care managers, and she's going to be speaking on what care options are available. Sometimes folks who are caregiving for a loved one don't know what is all out there in the community to help them. And hopefully Esther can give us a little insight into that. We're also going to be having our monthly care group. That's going to be on October 21st. And if anybody's interested and you're looking at being a caregiver or are a caregiver or were a caregiver, we have an eldercare Facebook page. And we're going to be asking our caregivers to share their courageous caregiver moments. We all have them.
Another chance for people to connect, again, kind of tying in that piece of connection, whether that be to ask for help or to share your experiences with others in case that it may help them through their time. So one of the other staples that I have that I always ask my guests, where can listeners really go a little further with these types of topics? What books or websites or any sort of resources that you recommend that would add some value?
Well, the book, The 36-Hour Day, is considered the Bible to dementia care. I think it's in like 6th edition now, and it's been around for decades. But it is a must-read for families caring for someone with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. And the premise of the book is that there is a lot that can be done to improve the lives of both those living with Alzheimer's and those caring for someone with Alzheimer's. And I just finished a book not too long ago called The Last Ocean by Nikki Garrard. And I thought it was really good. It talks about what dementia does to both the person living with it and to their caregiver. And as for like podcasts or things like that, if you haven't heard Brene Brown, definitely check her out. She has presented on several TED Talks. She's written several books and has this great podcast called Unlocking Us. She talks on vulnerability, courage, guilt, shame, and empathy, everything a caregiver experiences.
Brene Brown's a regular feature in this answer.
I bet.
And finally, to kind of wrap it up a little bit, if you want listeners to take away one key piece of advice or one takeaway message from this conversation, what would that be?
I think that self-care is not a luxury. It's a necessity. You need to take care of yourself when you care for someone else.
Perfect. Very succinct. I love it. So I really appreciate you chatting with us today. And I hope listeners learned a little bit about the experience of caregiving, what they can do if they're currently caregiving, and what they can do to sort of prepare in the future if you're planning on having to do that. So we really appreciate you stopping by, Terri.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned the importance of practicing self-care daily, whether you're actively taking care of others or not. For all of our UK employees listening, save the date for October 5th through the 9th. Our team and campus partners are hosting a special week of online events dedicated to you and your well-being. More details are coming soon, so keep an eye on your email for the announcement. We'll also be highlighting the week with a special bonus episode of this podcast, so be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss it. And finally, don't forget to listen through the outro to hear how you can connect with us and let us know any topics you'd like to hear covered in the future. Take care of yourself and others, and stay well. Thanks for listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, a podcast series from University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. The UK HR Health and Wellness team, consisting of certified health coaches, fitness experts, registered dietitians, and wellness specialists, offer a wide range of online and in-person programming to University of Kentucky employees, retirees, and their spouses. If you enjoyed this episode, you can listen and subscribe to future episodes wherever you find your podcasts. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching @UKY Wellness. There, you'll find links to episode show notes and more. You can also email healthandwellness@uky.edu with any questions or suggestions for future episode topics. To learn more about well-being benefits offered by University of Kentucky Human Resources, visit www.uky.edu/hr/wellbeing. Live well.